They're never definitive. They're never knockdowns. They're never throwouts. They're never all those things that people have on memes. They're never, owned. No one's ever. Well, actually, in socialism, you're owned, but in on memes, you're never owned.
Okay, let's go into Connor's talk here. Another week, another hysterical and paranoid Bill O'Reilly rant. What was this week's major fear? The war on Christianity? The war on Christmas? No, on Monday, it was the rising tide of socialism in America that had O'Reilly's blood pressure rising. Indeed, he seems almost positive that socialism, whatever that means, is coming to the United States, and it is all because the populace has become too lazy and the youths of America are incompetent and rude. Feel free to stop me anytime, Tomo. In what began as a statement about Bernie Sanders, O'Reilly launches into a tirade about the shifting mores of American society. Of course, he blames the young. American public school students believe they can slack off in school and then somehow show up in the workplace and make big money. Pipe dream. Billions of Americans cannot even speak proper English. Their concentration spans are so short they can't read a book or a magazine article. They speak in crude ways. Sometimes they can't even understand simple directions. How many of us has called a takeout place and had to repeat the order 5 times? Boy, that sounds curmudgeonly. O'Reilly's fear of a shifting society isn't entirely unfounded. He himself mentions the new New York Times CBS News poll that was released last week, and the results are quite encouraging for progressives. It found that a strong majority believes our current state of inequality is a major problem, and 57% felt the government should do more to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, while 68% favored raising taxes on people earning more than $1 million. Additionally, 61% of the respondents believed that in today's economy, just a few people at the top have a chance to get ahead. 66% said that wealth distribution in America is unfair and should be more even. It seems like the aggressive and outspoken progressive movement, led by figures such as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, is indeed getting through to the people. To O'Reilly, however, the current discussion of inequality is a complete sham designed to undermine capitalism and implement a socialist state. Of Bernie Sanders, O'Reilly said, "Mr. Sanders is a socialist who does not believe in capitalism. He essentially wants the federal government to regulate the private sector, providing money and assistance to those who are not competitive. And that is the play there. To convince Americans that market competition is bad, unfair, it's a rigged deal. Sadly, that message is gaining currency, pardon the pun." Back to the article. Indeed, Sanders is certainly for regulation of the private sector and providing assistance to the neediest, but this is not socialism, and Sanders is not a socialist, which is not to say that socialism is a bad idea. He is a democratic socialist who largely believes in the Nordic model, the economic system found in Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, with high progressive taxation and strong social welfare programs like universal health care. Coincidentally, Scandinavians are consistently found to be the world's happiest. Okay, we've got more, but is anything striking you there that you need to comment on?
Interestingly, I think that is the episode of Bill O'Reilly that I actually stopped watching in the middle and said, boy, I probably should take this apart phrase by phrase.
So you disagree with O'Reilly?
Well, O'Reilly has problems. We all know this. He has problems. And the problems identified here are somewhat different than the ones I'd choose. Now, O'Reilly can be forgiven somewhat for fearing socialism when the most interesting candidate on the Democratic side calls himself a socialist. Okay?
He calls himself a social democrat.
No, he doesn't call himself a social democrat. He calls himself a socialist. I've never heard him say the word social democrat or the phrase. He caucuses with the Democratic Party, but he calls himself a socialist and he runs as an independent. That's what he says. Now, his programs that he devises and promotes to us are pretty much social democrat. So maybe that's what he is, and maybe all he means by socialism is a sort of social democrat idea. Now that's fair, but it's also when people on the left mix up their terms indiscriminately, if somebody on the right gets them wrong, I don't see why we should blame them or make fun of them.
Well, what terms do the left mix up?
Socialism and social democrat. There is a difference. Socialism is not social democracy, but I see on the left all the time calling Sweden and Denmark socialist countries, and the success of the socialist countries. But of course, it's the social democratic model. This is all very, very weird, because of course they want to be socialists, but they realize socialism itself doesn't work. So they lie about it. Social democracy is a compromise position that has capitalism as part of it, and vast government redistribution as part of it, and which means huge taxes. I mean, the taxes in Denmark are just amazing, like 80%. And you start paying taxes at low down on the pay scales. And it's also not a very rich society in some ways, because they can't afford to buy the things they want to buy. They go heavily into debt to buy iPods and things that Americans, even on welfare, can afford. I mean, this is a really strange problem we have when dealing with countries like Denmark and Sweden and so forth. They are more redistributivist. Denmark is especially so. And calling it the happiest place on earth, well, do you believe everything Oprah says? I mean, I don't. And the social scientists who cooked up these numbers, I somewhat wonder about it, considering that Denmark has a horrid alcoholism problem, and they have one of the highest antidepressant intake rates of any country in the world. I think they may be the highest. And of course, I guess you're happy if you're drugged, but maybe the reason they're so drugged is because they're unhappy. So the society may be screwing them over, and they've been told that they have to be happy, so they put a good face on it. The stories I hear from people I know who've been in Denmark recently aren't so nice.
Do you find it hard to believe, though, that a country that gives everybody things for free and everybody gets to be equal isn't happy? Are you saying that people are going to necessarily be unhappy in a society like that?
Well, certainly not having to work gives you, there are lots of people who take them up on that. Certainly not ever having to work, really, or not having to apply yourself and just lazing around, gives a lot of people a kind of easygoing satisfaction that Americans, anyone who works, can't help but feel that maybe they want that too, because we all look forward to our leisure as we labor. That's just part of human nature. However, it's been my experience that when I don't work, I actually get this weird depressive state. And there's something about actually working and actually doing something that is the opposite of what Karl Marx wrote about. He wrote about the fear about alienation. I actually think that a person who doesn't have to work and just gets supported by other people becomes less of a human being. I believe these are the last men. I believe these are sad cases. And in fact, the sad cases in America, we reserve these for people who are injured, who are ill, who are old and too old to work. That's where
Young.
Well, the young, they're preparing for the future, allegedly. And the old are just recovering from the high peak of their life. But in America has reserved their socialistic aspects generally for the ends of the arc of life. You go from childhood and you rise to competence and mastery and work and labor, and then towards the end of your life, in your declension, in your declining years, then government steps in and takes care of you. That's how it's worked in America for the last 50 years or 60 or 70 years or whatever it's been. And that model, which is the American model, not the Danish model, is that basically we help mainly those people on both ends. That is, the government helps people on those ends. That's the American model. That's not laissez-faire. It's not libertarian. That's not capitalism. That's just the American political socioeconomic system, and it's different from everybody almost always being able to access that system, because we have less taxes than they do in Denmark. I mean, around in America, you get taxed about half. A productive person gets taxed about half or more. 40 to 60% of their income goes to taxes at the peak of their productivity, whereas in Denmark it's more like 80 and above. And the question is, that's the price they pay. That's the cost they pay, in a sense, for for almost anyone being able to access the system in the way they do. I'm not convinced that it makes people happier. And I'm certainly not as a person who admires man in his peak productive years and thinks that we all can and should aim to mastery. That is, to become confident, self-assertive, self-directing, responsible beings taking care of ourselves. The socialistic model and the social democratic model of Denmark, in this case, don't look so good to me.
Well, that just sounds like a matter of preference. That is, you're not saying, you seem to be conceding that socialism can work. It works in Denmark. That's the claim. I mean, when conservatives say, oh, it can't work, it'll always be a failure, Sanders seems to be saying, well, no, that's not true. Look at Scandinavia. It works fine. And the people, although even if, I don't know if he concedes this, but let's stipulate that we don't really know how to measure happiness. It doesn't. You want me? Some people would like the idea of living in a society not where they don't have to work anymore, but where they get to work on what they want to work on. They don't have to be slaves to some corporate agenda. They can get subsidized by the state and work on the novel that they want to work on, or the artwork, or the sport they want to work on, or the film they want to work on. So I don't think anybody's claiming that we need a state in which everybody lays around hauling in. What we're looking for is a state where people get to achieve their fullest, and not just act out some corporate CEO's vision of what he wants.
Well, that is actually the Marxian vision, right? That we get to do exactly what you want, and you don't have to do anything that anyone else wants you to do. And it's certainly great work if you can find work that you really enjoy to do that somebody else will pay you for. And that usually has costs, especially at the beginning of it for people. I know many people who've given up lucrative careers to do what they wanted and accepted wage cuts. The idea in democratic socialism is that you shouldn't have to really pay that heavy of a cost. The big problem when you do that, of course, is that you're divorcing remuneration, what a person makes, from what anybody wants. And at that point, what are you getting? What is society getting from you? The thing about markets is that every time you make a transaction and you go to work and get paid for whatever you're doing, somebody down the line is paying for that. They're paying for it by their voluntary decision. I want the widget you make. I want the thing you sell. I want the service you provide. But if you're out there making clay pots out of your own snot, if that's what you do, that's your great desire, and you take your pubic hair and put it in just right, and you're fulfilling your great desire of life, but no one's really buying it, society isn't getting out of that. So it's a dead loss. You become at some point grossly inefficient, and the people become less wealthy. People get less what they want. What I'm saying is that in these countries, they have real problems with getting what they want. They don't get what they want. They're actually poorer than they seem. They get some things. They get education for free or something like it. They have to pay. They still have to pay for childcare, but there's more childcare than is America provided by government taxpayers. But still, and then there are other things like healthcare, which they get for free. It's not always very good healthcare. The idea that these systems are wonderful. I mean, Sweden's healthcare system is one of the most jerry-rigged systems I've ever come across when you learn how it actually works, since it's tied with their public transportation system. It's just funding. I mean, these countries are not perfect, and they're having problems, and some of them are deeply weird psychological problems. Sweden is a self-hating society, as far as I can tell, and if they're happy, I would be shocked, because frankly, they sound to me like deluded Stepford wives. And just start listening to what really goes on in Sweden, and it's a shocking and weird story. And also, it should be noted that many of these countries have had to pull back from their full 90% taxation rates and things like that, simply because they're just not manageable. And a friend of mine has posited that, of course, there's more entrepreneurship if you have a safety net. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence for that, because these countries especially Sweden is a great example. They don't have any new products coming up. These are old companies that keep on making we make big anti-corporate stance. You had a nice little anti-corporate slant in your in the way you phrased the progressive challenge, but it's only the only big businesses, the only real successful businesses are some old ones. They don't have a lot of upstarts. In the world today, in America today, we get our new entrepreneurial people from abroad who come here and do stuff. In our country, we are also beginning to suffer from the problem of the Danish problem. That our people are becoming less entrepreneurial, but people coming here see that there are more opportunities here in America than there are in Denmark or Sweden or England or certainly Spain and Italy and the rest of the pigs countries, and they come here and they do better, and in so doing, they actually service humanity. Because every time a business is successful, people are getting something important for themselves. So I like capital. I love capitalism. It's a great model. It's voluntary cooperation. The bad part of capitalism is when somebody starts using the wealth they get through profits and then start trying to get special favors from government. That's the bad part. We don't need to have that, and that's the part, of course, that the progressives seem to love the most, is making the deals. Well, that's not good at all. That's bad.
Indeed, says the writer, Sanders is certainly for regulation of the private sector and providing assistance to the neediest, but this is not socialism, and Sanders is not a socialist, which is not to say socialism is a bad idea. He is a democratic socialist who largely believes in the Nordic model, the economic system found in Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, with high progressive taxation and strong social welfare programs like universal health care.
So he's not a socialist, though he calls himself one. He's a social democrat, but what he is, according to Ludwig von Mises, is an interventionist. Okay, a socialist, as is pretty much defined in the 19th century by most of the socialists at that time, is a person who wants the state to control everything. That's what government controls everything.
Well, they want the people to control everything.
Well, that they want that, but the only way for the people to do that is through government or mobs in the unions, and so that's the syndicalist model: is that unions get to run everything. And if you've ever been a member of a union, that should make your blood run cold. Anyway, it's interventionism, and it's sort of getting towards socialist, trying to accomplish socialist ends through a mixture of capitalists, that is private property ownership, and government controls, which restrict what you can do with your private property. And that method was very, very much promoted as the third way in the 20th century. Social Democrats were one, but they weren't alone there. If you're going to be specific, it's not just Social Democrats who provided that as a third way. Fascists did. The Nazis, National Socialist Party did. The Fabian Socialists in Great Britain did, and the progressive movement in America did. These were all doing the same kind of thing. It's not pure socialism, that's true, though they all seem to love socialism in some weird way. It's not a bad idea, but it's one kind of idea, and it has been analyzed by economists, and there are many problems with it. And one of the neat things about listening to modern politicians and their critics is almost nobody ever addresses those arguments. So maybe somebody should read Ludwig von Mises' Critique of Interventionism. Maybe they just might. Why not? Or read Public Choice Economics and see what actually is at play when you put the government to regulate the economy. When you take money from one group and give it to another on the basis of some rubric. That would be a good idea. From looking in this article, I saw no evidence that anyone had ever done anything like that.
Well, he's offering the Scandinavian model. You're saying it can't be done, and what Bernie Sanders says is, it works. There are plenty of countries in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, who do it. Sure, there are shortcomings, but there are shortcomings with our system. And at least in the Scandinavian model, there are safety nets, and people get health care, and it may not have all the upsides that we have, but it works. It's not the failure you claim it would be.
Well, I mean, what if it is the failure we're claiming it is? It doesn't work as well. It's dependent upon countries with more productive economies for many of their innovations and goodies. Maybe it isn't as good as he thinks it is, That's just one question, and I think that actually is a position that I would hold. But there's another problem. There's a long-term cycles go on here. Is that we know when you put in a government program, the early activities of that program have a different complexion from later activities of that program. Take the psychological. When Denmark and Sweden got their welfare states, so these are the Scandinavian countries were some of the most puritanical and moralistic and actually moral people on the planet. These people did not hurt their neighbors very much. They were not leeches. They were not moochers. They worked hard. These people were amazing, and they got very rich in the middle of the 20th century, especially in Sweden, through amazingly free markets, far freer than even in America. Sweden did very well up until the 60s when the welfare state was put in, because of free markets, largely free
markets. The Dutch traders were among the first great traders, right?
Exactly. In Holland, of course, that was a long time ago. But these countries were not only very hard workers, but they were very moral. Their governments are not corrupt by nature. That is, you're not going to get a lot of graft there. You're not going to... And also, you put in a welfare state that has enticements for people to leech off the common good. Yeah, right. Oh, I don't have to work. I can just live, right? That is something you can do. Even now, there are people who basically join a rock band, surf all day, and get EBT cards and get their food, buy lobster. I mean, this is well known. Fox has done a lot of work on this. This is well known. You can in America right now live at the expense of the taxpayer. I mean, a lot of people do who aren't really even hurting. They just don't want to work. You can do it if you work the system. Now, when in the early days, in the 60s and 70s, especially the 60s, when Sweden and Denmark were getting their welfare states in full working order, the resistance to actually mooching and leeching off the system were really great. You were supposed to work, and many people were said, yeah, I'm going to be one of those people who supports the common good. I am going to work, and the taxes are going to come out and support these people. They had what you might call the old charitable, remember the Protestant work ethic? They had that. What Weber referred to as the basis of capitalism, the Protestant work ethic. It was probably wrong, but nevertheless, what he referred to there was at play in the Scandinavian countries. But over time, that ethic has eroded, and more people start living off the expense of the taxpayer. The more they do that, their mores change, the complexion of the country changes, and it is getting more corrupt. And so you have these long stages when you put in a system that denies and that, let's say, buffers at best for irresponsibility. There's a tendency for people to become irresponsible to get the benefits. That's the problem with any of these programs. We've always recognized that. What we find is that in the southern European countries, the nations of southern Europe that are going broke, and are going broke spectacularly.
Is it an acronym?
Yes, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain.
Oh.
All these are four countries that, how should we put this, are doing what we expect when you throw responsibility out the door. The people become irresponsible in many ways. In Greece, for instance, is it over 50% of the population works for the government? You could only have a small, I mean, the whole transfer of wealth thing really only works well if a small people are supported by lots of people. When the number of people who are supported through taxes grows and grows and grows, it becomes unbearable for the others. And then, of course, politicians who don't like taxing because no one wants to be taxed, and so they start deficit spending. So they start borrowing. So the governments become insolvent. We know this in America because our governments can't balance budgets either. Why? It's always they want to promise, but they don't want to get rid of any benefits because that benefits somebody. So the pigs countries, it just so happens that the people there are kind of piggy, and they become piggy because it's not because they always were a little bit more easygoing with morality, in the sense that, well, you know, if I live at the expense of the common, you know.
And we like these folks. We like Voltaire. We like.
Well, I wouldn't say Voltaire was a pig, but
we like Michelangelo. We like all of these.
Oh, but of course we like the people of the South who accomplished something. But of course we like the style of the South, the easygoing style of the South. If you would want to party with somebody, I think almost everybody would say, let's party with an Italian or a Spaniard, and not with a Dane or a Swede or a Finn. Yeah. And I know, as a Finn, I can tell you, if I were to party with somebody, I would not choose a bunch of Finns.
Okay.
Okay, we all know this. Why? Because partying is basically just the consumption. That's what partying is. Partying is leisure, it's consumption, it's the reveling in consumption. And if you spend all the money in the house, in the mood of the party, just do it. You don't think about the morrow. In fact, it is, it's the legendary wine, women, and song. It's never giving a thought for the morrow. That's the attitude. The southern regions of Europe have that attitude more than the rather puritanical and Protestant work ethic and kind of brittle people of the north. And because of that, the pigs countries are going the way of the welfare state first, and there's a lag. We have the welfare states of the north are having similar problems. Finland, I think, is doing probably the best job of managing that. It also gets you key to why these things work. Finland is the most culturally and genetically homogenous group of that people, and so they actually have more of a clan attitude. So the defecting on the others, that is, leeching off of everybody and cooperating with everybody, and okay, this is not the best way of doing it, but we can get it done, and we just go through it, and we get sisu, blah, 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 and the Finns managed to pull their welfare state, doing it fairly well compared to everybody else. I would oppose, and do oppose the Finnish welfare state, but that's beside the point. Finns do it better than the Danes, who do it better than the Swedes, who are just going down a bad road, partly because of their utter hatred for their own culture, and their idiotic allowances for the Muslims to take over and other countries, immigrants to take over and leech off the system. They have really big problems in Sweden. What's going on in Norway? They're a different case because Norway has a resource share out socialism. That is, that they have oil, and they're like Alaska or Wyoming, where the importance for the government of the revenue from mineral wealth is shared out in some way. And so those countries have a different complexion than Denmark and Sweden, which don't have it so much. So you have to look at actually the political economies of these countries. So Norway is a big exception because of and it has its own problems. But the pigs countries are gone down, and that's because of moral corruption, just the willingness to defect. That's what we call cooperation theory. It's defection, when you basically screw the other guy. And don't cooperate. Instead, you just basically engage in plunder. And plunder is fun, and it's partying atmosphere. And they're now experiencing the downsides of that. They have really bad economies. They're all pretty much going down. So I would say that looking to Denmark and pretending that America can do that is absurd. The Scandinavian countries were, when they instituted their very large and very generous with other people's money, systems of redistribution, they had fairly cultural homogenous societies. America is not that. So we will have people who on the outs do not feel beholden to help whoever. There will be a tendency for people who are not those groups to really milk the system, and the system will not be a solvent. I mean, that's just the problem, is that how do you keep going a system that's based on taking money from some and giving to others? This has its problems inherent in it, and almost no one even discusses the numbers problems. I mean, it's just, numbers don't add up after a while, and that's why in America right now we live in a society where we can't balance actually the people can't either, because we're all pretty much living off of an imagined future of being able to pay better. And the government is doing it the worst of all, because they are basically not balancing budgets or paying down debt. They're accumulating debt, and that is actually a very dangerous thing. That is the sign of the end times, you might say, and we could actually experience the end of the United States of America.
So your point is, when they claim that these ideas work in Scandinavian countries, it's because of a limited horizon. That is, yeah, you're fine falling down a building until you actually hit the cement. Am I accurate?
That's the classic. Free fall. You're never freer than in free fall, right up at the moment you hit the pavement. I mean, that's just the way it is. And and this idea of time as an element for judging time and cycles, as an element of judging a society and its policies, is not talked about enough. Right now we're talking a lot about inequality because nitwits like Sanders and Warren keep on bringing it up, and Reich. But let's be honest here. The reason we're talking about it and it's gaining purchase in society is the result of the bust and the fact that we're in basically in a depression. We're in the depression because of a long-term cycle that what is caused by money problems, credit problems, regulation problems, and they are only looking. They don't. That's why we have the inequality we have to a great extent, is because we're not in boom times. It might be a good idea for people to think less about the inequality, which I think could be considered a problem. It's the indicator, the canary in the coal mine, for the bigger problem of the bust, the depression. We've got to get out of this boom and bust cycles, and their unwillingness to consider more than one or two little issues as part of that boom and bust. They always go for one thing. There's not enough of the right kind of regulation, and they know what it is. It's the Glass-Steagall Act, according to Elizabeth Warren. It's this or that. But it's witless because they won't consider the other factors that are, I think, obviously bigger. They just won't. They just refuse to discuss them, and they make fun of people actually who discuss them. And thus, I don't really take them seriously.
Further in the article, of course, O'Reilly and the rest of his Fox News ilk don't quite care about the difference between democratic socialism or Marxian socialism or the welfare state. His use of the word is not so much about social systems, but about what the word means to so many of his viewers. Much like the words fascism and communism were used during the 20th century, the right wing seems to have two views of socialism, one of them being extremely paranoid and other less paranoid. The paranoid view believes that socialism means Stalinesque totalitarianism, and the less paranoid view means mass laziness and nightmarish bureaucracy. The paranoid system stems from F.I. Hayek's classic polemic, The Road to Serfdom, which proposed that any government planning, he had the New Deal in mind, would inevitably lead to a totalitarian state, which of course did not pan out.
Well, first is in defense of the paranoid style, it wasn't because of F.I. Hayek that we have this view of socialism. It's because of the fucking Soviet Union, you nimrods. I mean, this is dumb. The Soviet Union was a totalitarian state. The Nazis, National Socialism, were a totalitarian state. We have this vision of paranoia about the word socialism because socialists keep on making paranoia-ready examples. Don't blame it on F.I. Hayek and his thesis in The Road to Serfdom. That's nitwittery gone amok. Okay, that's just reprehensible. It is a dodge, and the person should be ashamed of himself. A. Let's go B. The other question, I mean, when I read Road to Serfdom, I actually didn't think it was that great of a book. And I think it's a better book than I thought it was originally, because I thought, for the same reason the bad things about central planning, of course, he wasn't talking about redistribution here. Remember, he wasn't talking about the Danish model. He was talking about the planning of industry. That is the subject of what he was talking about. It was a kind of interventionism that basically said, with nationalized industries, or just simply said, you have to produce this amount, you have to produce this amount.
Well, wait a minute, he says that he was talking about the New Deal, that is the redistribution state.
Well, no. The New Deal also included things like that. The New Deal basically, came down in some portions because it was found unconstitutional to tell someone how much they could charge for a suit. How much a tailor could charge. I mean, in fact,
when people think of the New Deal, though, they don't think about central planning. They think about, Social Security and taking care of people. It's not central planning that was the point of the New Deal.
Well, if people are ignorant, they'll think anything they want. The New Deal was largely, it had many elements. It was basically a whole bunch of ideas that were grab bag, chosen from, thrown at the wall, and FDR saw what stuck. Okay? One of them was redistribution. Another set were central planning. I mean, can we get a picture? We can't get a picture of the little box right behind you?
What box?
The box on the stand. The NRA doesn't stand for the National Rifle Association. What does it stand for? That was a central planning. It was not a redistributionist program. It was a central planning bureau. That's what it was. Pretending that Hayek was not fighting a kind of regulatory interventionism that micromanaged business is just wrong. That guy is wrong. Now, of course, there is a difference between various programs, and I'm not saying that redistributionism isn't different from central planning, but he was arguing against the central planning business because it was really big in England. Was a very big deal. There were many books and articles.
Progressives' conceit, right? That economies and systems can be run better by experts and
That's exactly what it is.
yeah, scientists.
And yeah, it's a technocratic society, and they believe that laissez-faire, that is, free markets are bad, but regulated markets can be used for the general benefit. That's what they believe. And Hayek was saying that the more central planning you have, the more totalitarian it will get. Nicely in America and in Britain, almost everybody's pulled back. Denmark and Sweden have pulled back from much of this too. In fact, there are many ways in which Denmark scores higher on the economic freedom indices than America does. That is, America is way down on the list of right now than Denmark on some aspects of control of markets. They have heavy redistribution, yes, and I'm against that. That's one question. But it's different from what Hayek was talking about. And in America, we actually pulled back from many of those controls. A tariff is part of that. But there's more than that. There's the industrial boards. There's, you can do this, you could not do this, all that kind of controls. Well, America has done some of that. And it's part of what Congress does all the time. But they change it and they mix it up, and it's not as big as it could be or as Hayek feared it was getting. So in a sense, Hayek was probably right. It certainly is the case that the very nature of a central planning board is totalitarian. That is, it's telling people what to do on a micromanaged level.
Okay, but this is not what Bernie Sanders wants then. I mean, we're talking about Bernie Sanders' version of socialism or social democracy, and perhaps this writer is disputing the idea that just wanting to redistribute is not going to lead to the paranoid socialist vision that O'Reilly fears. What the paranoid social vision is this totalitarian, ultra-centrally controlled state, and what Sanders and his co-travelers are talking about now is not that. They're talking about equality and social justice and economic justice.
Well, yeah, they are talking about that. Yeah,
So there's no reason to fear this kind of socialism.
Yeah, there is, but it's not the same. For one thing, it's not socialism. At some point, you just got to stop calling it socialism. I mean, let's be real here. It's not socialism if all you're doing is redistributing wealth. And if you're not controlling industry, if you're letting the industry pretty much behave according to market principles with profit and loss, then you're not engaging in control like Hayek was addressing in The Road to Serfdom. So that's kind of all nitwittery there. Okay, so let's just put that aside. But if you are bailing out, let's think about redistribution for a moment. If the idea is the government should make sure that no one suffers, economic justice, well, that idea, when you put it into a diverse marketplace of politics, in a culturally diverse country like America, what does that do? Well, one thing it does is that it leads to Wall Street bailouts. And from the left, I get this really bizarre Schrodinger's cat-like attitude toward the bailouts. One moment, the bailouts are a sign of horrible inequality and blah, blah. And the next moment they realize, oh yeah, we probably do have to bail out because we can't have the country go down in the tubes. I've heard people on the streets of Occupy protests say that the bailouts probably were a good thing. Quite a few of them, more than one. So you have the leftists who hate giving any money to wealthy people, and you have the leftists who are technocrats and realize, oh yeah, if once you start bailing people out, you have to bail everybody out if they fail, and if Wall Street fails, of course you have to bail them out. The logic of redistribution leads to something not as nasty as totalitarianism, because I don't think the logic of redistribution leads to totalitarianism, and that's not what Hayek was arguing. But it does lead to the second part of the critique, that leads to lazy bumism. Everybody wants to be a lazy bum and live at the expense of everybody else. This was the great fear.
Including corporations and banks.
Including corporations and banks. And those are the exact people we cannot have on the dole. And they're now on the dole, and they're still on the dole. They're always going to be on the dole as long as technocrats are in charge, because they cannot think their way out of the box of why redistribution is a bad idea and why helping people who are down is a bad idea.
Well,
and why
it's not a bad idea to help people who are down. Are you saying it is?
It's dangerous. That is, the more you help them, the more they want to be down. It's a problem. I mean, it's always been a problem. Anybody who's trying to give to charity knows that charity has its limits. And when you unlimited it through government, it has real problems. We want to be able to help people, especially people who cannot work and who, that's fine. That's what we all do, as we want to do. But the idea that the systems that have been put in place in the 20th century are the best systems that need to be protected and never changed because they were so great and so wonderful, but only added to, which is the progressive attitude, that attitude is idiotic. I, as a libertarian, would like to suggest that the best way to do all these things and help all these people is through the systems that could have been developed better if this Great Depression had not destroyed them. And that is the systems of civil association and mutual assistance organizations. People helping each other and then helping those who are down through their organizations is the best way to deal with the tragedies of life. And then, of course, savings is the best way to deal with your own retirements. But, of course, inflation and the whole modern state works against the best way of doing anything. And so I don't think that a modern person who has never really read history and really understands economics can understand what we've lost by the addition of the technocratic state. The policies of the technocratic state have disallowed the natural and humane ways of helping people who are nearing the end of their life or helping people who have tragedies. We never want to pretend that the past was easy. In fact, it was harder 300 years ago before capitalism than it was 150 years ago with full capitalism and not very much government. And the move to the technocratic state to help people has actually disabled us from helping people the best ways. That would be my main point. And I don't think that these people who idealize socialism give individualism a chance. They don't give it a chance because they are fearful and they have a lot of bad ideas. And this guy has really lots of bad ideas.
Well, here he actually responds to what you just said. O'Reilly seems to take the latter view and is positive that the coming socialistic nightmare will arrive because the population has become uneducated and lazy, especially the youths. It is a view that has existed throughout history, an older man complaining about young people, sure that the future is cursed. 50 years ago, the elderly were complaining about O'Reilly's generation, and 50 years from now, the millennials will be complaining about the youth. This is nothing new. Of course, back when O'Reilly was growing up, McCarthy was targeting anyone who could have been socialist, so maybe he's feeling nostalgic? O'Reilly goes on to blame the lack of education in America, seemingly unaware that millennials are the most educated of any generation. But there are fewer jobs for them in the past. You have to get educated, says O'Reilly. That doesn't mean you have to go to college, but if you don't, you have to know how to fix stuff or perform some service that other people need. It's so very simple to O'Reilly. It's not because of outsourcing or technological innovation or globalization or the destruction of unions over the past 40 years. No, it's because American public school students believe they can slack off in school and then somehow show up in the workplace and make big money.
The author has a point there. Bill O'Reilly's constant complaints about the youth are embarrassing to everybody. Now, I'm not saying that the youths today are, especially wonderful. When I was a teenager, I pretty much despised the ideas and the attitudes of most of my contemporaries. And it's only through time that I've come to tolerate my peers. And I've never been all that impressed with myself. Human beings are, not all that impressive in the main. That's an obvious truth. this generational thing that O'Reilly keeps bringing up is not a very good point, because actually some of the biggest problems we've had for all the generations has been the older people. The older people are the people who most glommed onto a redistributive program, Social Security, for instance, and they're the ones who actually the greatest generation glommed onto NRA and would have loved to have seen the takeover of the Supreme Court. And I mean, it was a very popular thing with FDR. They voted in FDR 4 times. This man was, in his own way, kind of a dictator. That's how he liked to behave. And the programs he came up with are largely bad. There were a few good ones, but many, many bad ones. And it was largely because of Hoover and FDR that the crash of 1929 became the Great Depression. Their programs were horrible. FDR merely exacerbated the bad programs of Hoover. This is well known. If you can look it up in Murray Rothbard's The Great Depression, there's just many examples of it. It's now, Amity Shlaes is a good book on the Depression, which shows that the high school textbook treatment we got of the Great Depression is nonsense. And it is utter bilge and nonsense, and people don't really know what they're talking about if they get a normal education in America. And here is where I agree with Bill O'Reilly, right? I mean, public education in America is a disaster. And it's a disaster. The guy who says we're the most educated generation in human history, what? Okay, first is the schooling is bad. For the most part, there's some wonderful exceptions to that. Many of them in charter schools, some of them in private schools, many of them in homeschooling. But public schooling has always been bad, and it's gotten worse, and it's maybe picking up a little bit here and there. But just because you've been to school and you got a few degrees in here and there, or you got on to college in record numbers, especially if you're a woman in America, because the number of men have dropped, and that's an interesting thing in and of itself. Probably that Mr. O'Reilly should be worried about a little bit more than the youths themselves. There's a difference between education and schooling. Our schooling isn't very good, and frankly, on the basis of this article, I would say that this guy doesn't have much of an education.
In conclusion, O'Reilly reminisces about his childhood upbringing in the 1950s suburbia. There were nearly hundreds of kids in the neighborhood all over the place. Okay, this is more about, that has nothing to do with socialism, so let's go past. But he does want to suggest that O'Reilly's a racist. So, in summary, the rising tide of progressivism or socialism, according to O'Reilly, is based on the myth of inequality, which has been sold to the slacking and dependent youth of America. Now for reality. Inequality is no sham. And over the past 40 years of neoliberal policies that O'Reilly advocates, inequality has skyrocketed. The top 1% shares of wealth has been more than tripled since 1977, from 7.1% to 22% in 2012, while the bottom 90% share has fallen from 36.4% in the early 80s to 22.8% in 2012. Today, the top 1% owns nearly as much wealth as the bottom 90%. It is not only wealth inequality, but income inequality. Since the 80s, most of the gains in income have gone to the top 1%, while the rest have stagnated. O'Reilly may be able to ignore this with his $24 million salary, but the people cannot and will not, no matter how much him and his friends shout about socialism. So now that you've been demolished, what do you have to say?
Well, I mean, I think there's something to it, and I've indicated before. There's something to it, this guy is saying, is that some indicators of inequality have risen. Now, the statistics they give, the statistics are very dangerous to deal with, and you have to actually explain statistics, every statistic you use, and since I'm off the cuff here, I can't. It's just that, like I said before, there has been an increase of wealth at the top, and the wages have pretty much stagnated lower down. That suggests to me, well, of course, that's something we saw in 1929 too. Right before the bust in 1929, we saw the same thing happening. This was a result of a kind of financial boom. We had that financial boom in the 2000s when the Federal Reserve kicked up the money supply, went down to zero interest rates, brought everything down, and the housing market boomed. And combined with that wonderful factor of the degradation of the mortgage system and its socialization, in a sense, the smart people of this country ruined the system of the old mortgage system, where we had dispersed knowledge dealing with markets and developed what they considered an efficient aftermarket. Well, this was done by government, largely, and by people, all the smart people in Harvard and Yale and so forth.
Well, the educated people.
The educated people created this new market, these new markets, and that is the markets that went bust. And that's what gave us the start of the Great Depression we now live in, right? We're in it, and gave us the depression we live in now. And during that period, of course, is well known as a no-growth recovery. Well, there hasn't been much of a recovery, really, and but there's been some, but we haven't really bounced back because there isn't really a new boom going on, and it's not a normal recovery because it's been so carefully mismanaged by government. They've done so many interventions to help people that now people are not being helped. This is the problem when you intervene in the economy, is that the markets after a bust, need to revise their prices. Everybody needs to figure out what can we do now. Now that the old prices don't make sense, they don't, but as many inputs and during deflation, an unexpected deflation, you then have to come up with a new order. Well, there's been a whole series of government programs to make sure that this doesn't happen. And because of that, we have a long depression. So Bush and Obama together messed over the economy. Notice I used the word messed and not the one I wanted to use. And we're all suffering from it. And my question for these people here who says that we need to, people won't stand for the inequality. Well, it's not the inequality that's the problem. People don't really care about inequality when they're doing well. When they're not doing well, then they begin to see, oh, it's only those people doing well. Well, yeah. Why? Because those people there were bailed out and bailed out nicely, or they're dealing with the system that is keeping the American government's deficit spending afloat. That is, there's still a lot of inflation pumping through the system, and people close to that system make lots of money, and everybody far from it are screwed. So, what do you do about this? The people should be concerned about the nature of boom and bust. But that requires understanding the nature of boom and bust, and it's not about inequality. That is blips on statistics. The real problem is that we do not have a vibrant market economy because it has been prevented, and it has prevented by the technocrats whom the progressives and socialists so adore. They are the class that is causing the current problem. They think they, of course, are, that's why socialism is gaining more ground now, is that they want to go beyond the Harvard and Yale versions of technocrats, so we need to now go to maybe something more Denmarky or something a little bit more Marxian. I mean, I know now people who talk about Marx and who talk about full communism being better than we have now. This is all largely a result of our depression. The depression needs to be resolved and gotten out of. The way to do that is with freedom and responsibility, not with technocratic mumbo-jumbo from people who are merely pretending to know what they cannot know. They cannot do what they want to do, so what they do is they mess up the economy, and then we, the American people, apparently just want to just pull their hair out and get excited, and maybe these socialists have something on their mind. Yeah, socialism has just been disproved so many times. And social democracy is not nearly as good as it looks, because it has a long-term cycle just like boom and bust does. And we don't want that cycle. The cycle we want is progress, not boop, 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 boop. I mean, that's what we're going to get. We're going to get rise and fall until we figure out that we can do without nonsense if we just stick to good principles.
Going back, backtracking just a little bit, because you've seen more episodes of O'Reilly than I've looked at. Does he really believe that inequality is a myth?
Yeah, there's a real problem. There's a real problem with O'Reilly. In libertarian circles, there's a negative term called vulgar libertarianism. It's to pretend that the markets we have are free markets, and then to wax eloquent about how good free markets are, and then to defend any rich person or any business that's doing business as an example of the free market. Well, that's just witless, because of course many of the markets that we deal with are heavily regulated. And
or crony markets.
Right. I mean, there's people have petitioned Congress for special favors. Lots of tax breaks of weird sorts. We actually don't really know where the free market ends and just crony capitalism begins. It's just such a mess in America. And it's vulgar and stupid to pretend that we have a free market or that we have free enterprise. Not when there's so much graft and so much nonsense from Congress. Not when so many people, so many companies get special favors. When so many cities give special favors to a company to move in, a tax break for 10 years, no taxes, but the other businesses in town have to pay those taxes. It's just, there's this, the country is riddled with basically just corruption. The corruption is the democratic element of progressivism. It's what you get when you think you can have Congress and control the economy. What do? They it becomes a bidding war for special favors. That's the result. It's bad for business, it's bad for markets, but it's good for some people. And Bill O'Reilly is under the illusion that basically America is a capitalist country with the only problem is a bunch of progressive Democrats. No, that's not the problem. The problem is almost every Republican, every Democrat in Congress, and every president we've had since Grover Cleveland. What to do about this is, of course, we have to ridicule Bill O'Reilly. He is a fool when it comes to the nature of free enterprise today. It's not free. We live in crony capitalism, with some markets freer than others. And those pockets of freedom are important to us, and we should realize when they happen. But many of them are also degrading as they get taken over by politics and the bidding that goes on for regulations. And this constant desire on the part of progressives to mention how important regulation is just simply feeds the beast. Because as soon as you have regulations, one congressperson, somebody like maybe Hillary Clinton, with one little word in a document or one codicil somewhere can make or break any company. So of course she gets huge speaking fees. So of course her campaigns get. Of course she's the most corrupt candidate since LBJ. I mean, she is modern politics, and she is crony capitalism, the government end of it. That's what her business is. She and her husband are corrupt in the extreme, and for not to understand that from a progressive is I guess understandable, because they so idolize government that they can't see how bad the system is, that they advise and then and defend in almost every case. And then somebody like Bill O'Reilly has the opposite problem. He thinks that any business that's doing something is good. Well, that's bullshit. And he is a bullshit artist because he doesn't understand that the crony capitalist elements corrupt the whole market process, and we don't really know where goodness ends and goodness begins when we have something so muddied as it is currently. And so the guy is right. Bill O'Reilly is a nut when it comes to business, because he doesn't understand how bad things really are. And he doesn't understand that his people, the kind of people he likes, those Lindsey Grahams and John McCain's and all those big government conservatives, they're as bad as any Democrat is. But O'Reilly, who was raised as a Catholic and who was raised to buy into the system and has been done very well in the system, apparently doesn't see it, and he gets confused by free markets and crony markets. And that's because he doesn't understand economics. He is as bad as any, in many ways. He supports an increase in the minimum wage, not because he has any clue about what it does, but because it just seems like it's time. This man is a nitwit. And so is the guy who writes about him.
Okay, final paragraph. There are many causes for this hollowing out of the middle class. Some that were inevitable, like technological innovation and globalization. But neoliberal policies embraced by both Democrats and Republicans over the past few decades and advocated by corporate America have made it all the more possible. What's your take on this neoliberal abhorrence? And what does it mean exactly?
A neoliberal is a term given for moderate libertarian ideas, coming from economists who like free markets mostly. So they want to see trade opened up, and they like globalism, just like libertarians do. And neoliberal is just a way of castigating that kind of moderate libertarian ideas, and they say that, and of course leftists use the term, especially in Europe, a lot to describe people who are opposed to opposed to tax increases, who are opposed to redistributionism, want to see it cut back some degree, and they go ape and bananas, and they use it excessively, and they, like almost all terms, they cast it around just as it's.
Well, I take it's a term they use to describe those horrible anarchists who want to do away with government, right? That's the same group of people there, the Tea Partiers, the horrible anarchists.
Yeah, well, Tea Partiers don't understand what a neoliberal is and wouldn't. A Tea Party is just a ravaged American who wants government to balance its budgets and stop behaving idiotically. Okay, a Tea Partier is the idea that when the left demonizes the Tea Party, we realize that the left is crazy. We know that. That's just the way it is. But neoliberal is a complex charge because, of course, though neoliberalism has been advocated many times, neoliberal programs, let's say privatization, which could be considered neoliberal, right? Almost none has happened in America.
How about deregulation? Things have just been horribly deregulated. That's part of what's caused the problems.
Yeah, that's what they say.
That's neoliberal, right?
Deregulation would be, and of course, the only real good successful deregulations, for instance, done by, not the only, but mainly the biggest deregulations that happened during the 80s were started by Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy. Okay, Ted Kennedy was responsible for the deregulation of the airlines, which we should remember has given a boon to mankind. It may have given a service we don't really quite like, but it gave really cheap air flights. In the 60s and early in the 70s, air flight was expensive. And it's not that expensive anymore, and all sorts of people travel. So if you like air travel, the deregulation was quite a success. There were deregulations. The trucking industry was deregulated during the earlier part, but not much has happened since. And it's Glass-Steagall was becoming. There were so many workarounds of Glass-Steagall that when it went out of existence at the end of Bill Clinton's term, it was hardly even felt. There's a lot of weirdnesses involved in all this, but we can't ascribe, for instance, bailouts to neoliberal policies. That's not a. You can't call Sarbanes-Oxley neoliberal. These are huge regulatory agendas that have occurred within our time, and they were in response to debacles. The whole bailout thing has been happening for years. It was managed for a lot by the Federal Reserve and not Congress. But then the Congress has gotten involved as time went on, and this bailout mentality is probably one of the major, I would say, is one of the major sources of the current debacle we're in, and that's not neoliberal. Some neoliberals have praised Greenspan and so forth in the past, but it's not in any way libertarian. And then there are these vast, weird free trade agreements, these reciprocal trade agreements that have been going on, NAFTA and so forth. I'm against them. I'm against them all, but I'm against also what would be put in their place. Excuse me. I think that we should do what Britain did in the middle of the 19th century. Unilateral free trade. That's what Britain did, and it had amazing success. Unilateral free trade is libertarian and liberal, or neoliberal. All these agreements are progressive. So let's just get that straight.
Continue the last paragraph. We are living in a divided society, and O'Reilly cannot quite see it from his Long Island mansion. Sure, there are some lazy people in America, but most people do not end up living in poverty because they are lazy, but because of lack of opportunity. During the mid-20th century, economic policies were much different in America, and so was class division. Today, taxes have been slashed for the wealthy, while neoliberal trade deals like NAFTA and the upcoming TPP have helped destroy all stability for working class people. Furthermore, the middle class has been divided because of social and cultural issues spewed by talking heads like O'Reilly. The only way to truly rescue the middle class is for the middle class to once again form an alliance against corporate America. Young people are highly educated and skilled, but the economy does not want them. It doesn't matter how many degrees they get. There is only so much an individual can do before it comes time for the collective to join together and use their numbers to demand an economy and social system that works for them. Final thoughts?
Well, except for the fact that it sounds like a soapbox a socialist at the end. As soon as any politician says "come together," it's time to start taking out the knives and the guns, because that guy is dangerous. And that means every politician ever. These people are just come together. That's of course, but we do need to fix something. I mean, it's obvious this is a systemic problem. He's right; it's a systemic problem. The idea that we need to go against corporations is idiotic. What you need to stop doing is having all these special favors everywhere. The reason there's not much opportunity is because there's too many controls. Government started licensing things. Well, licensing is a way to fuck opportunity for almost anybody. If you have to get a license, you have to go through.
It's a modern guild system.
It's a modern guild system, and and of course, the people who are in love it because it protects them from the people who are out. What are opportunities? Competition. People who have the advantage don't like competition. As Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. Big business is in the business. They try to use government and Congress to limit their competitors. And we need to stop that, but we don't need to stop them from trying to service their consumers. So this whole thing about what do we need, the opportunities we want, is more freedom. It's not managing things more. People like this Yahoo would probably increase the number of licensed occupations because that's the way he thinks. That's what government people think like. Oh, we need to do something. Well, what do governments do? They prohibit, they mandate, they have price ceilings, price floors, and they just make you go through hoops to do whatever you want to do. And that's what governments do. They don't make people opportunities. Opportunities are out there when people figure out what they have in themselves that somebody else values and is willing to pay for. And what we need is more freedom and not less, and more responsibility and not less. This guy is just out of the loop. I mean, what he's prescribing is not merely hair of the dog that bit us. He's prescribing the fucking dog down our throats.